Welcome to Wisdom for the Present, where we take ancient truth and bring it into clear, modern understanding. This episode uses AI-generated narration based on human-researched and written material.
Glad to be here for this one.
Yeah, so imagine a society where absolute freedom is finally achieved.
Right.
Like there is no central authority, no objective truth, and absolutely no overarching moral framework that dictates how people should actually live their lives.
Just total autonomy.
Exactly. Everyone is simply encouraged to live their truth, to act authentically, and to just do whatever feels right in their own eyes.
On the surface, it sounds like this modern utopian ideal.
It really does, an enlightened era of totally unconstrained free thinkers. But we're looking at an ancient text today that proves this exact scenario isn't a recipe for utopia at all.
Far from it.
Right. It is actually a historical case study for apocalyptic violence. So typically when we approach these ancient historical texts, especially the ones in the Hebrew Bible, we carry this certain set of expectations with us.
We want the heroes.
Yeah. We anticipate the triumphant parting of seas, the golden age of kings, or these epic, sweeping victories of leaders establishing order in a chaotic world.
We expect the narrative arc to bend toward justice.
Exactly. But today, we are stepping into a landscape where the compass is just utterly smashed. We are diving into the epilogue of the Book of Judges.
Specifically chapters 17 through 21.
Yeah, and our mission for this deep dive is to extract the practical wisdom, the moral insight, and the real-life application from a text that acts as a mirror to the darkest aspects of human nature.
It really is. It's arguably one of the most unsettling and psychologically complex sections of ancient literature you can study.
Because we're not dealing with the good guys anymore.
Right. We have completely left the era of the great heroes behind.
Right.
We aren't dealing with the military genius of Joshua or, the high-stakes drama of Moses.
We're in the collapse.
Yeah, we are positioned squarely in the late Bronze Age collapse. So this is a period of severe social, moral, and institutional disintegration.
Wow.
And the author of this text gives us a thesis statement. It's this defining refrain that echoes like a warning siren throughout these final chapters.
And what's that phrase?
It says, "In those days there was no king in Israel. Every man did that which was right in his own eyes."
Every man did that which was right in his own eyes. Which brings us back to that initial thought experiment.
Right.
It is absolutely fascinating how a phrase from roughly 3,000 years ago captures the ethos of the 21st century so perfectly.
Oh, perfectly. We champion this idea of curated reality today, where truth is subjective and morality is highly individualized.
Yeah, my truth versus your truth.
Exactly. But this text operates as a sociological autopsy. It shows us that when a society actually adopts unchecked moral relativism, the result isn't freedom. The result is the commodification of religion, the complete collapse of human empathy, extreme tribalism, and horrific systemic violence.
Yeah, I'd even push that further, actually.
How so?
Well, the author isn't just offering a philosophical critique of relativism. They are documenting the mechanical breakdown of an entire civilization.
That's a good point, because ancient Israel at this time, it was organized as an amphictyony.
Oh, what?
An amphictyony, it's a loose confederation of 12 distinct tribes. So they didn't have a standing army,
right.
They didn't have a centralized executive branch, and they didn't even have a unified tax system.
So what was keeping them together?
Literally the only thing holding these diverse, geographically spread out tribes together was a shared covenant with a higher authority, their God.
Oh, wow.
So when that shared objective reality dissolved, when everyone just became their own ultimate authority, the center could not hold.
The center couldn't hold.
Yeah. The author is showing us the cascading failure of decentralized governance when the moral foundation rots away.
And what's brilliant about how this is written, I think, is that it doesn't start with a massive nation-ending war.
No, it doesn't.
The collapse of an entire civilization doesn't begin on a battlefield. It starts in the living room.
It starts with domestic dysfunction.
Exactly. So the narrative zoom lens is pulled all the way in. We find ourselves in the hill country of Ephraim, and we're looking at a single family.
Right. There's a man named Micah.
Yeah, Micah. And he has committed a staggering crime against his own household. He has stolen 1,100 pieces of silver from his own mother.
Which, just to give you a sense of scale, is a fortune.
An astronomical fortune.
Unbelievable. To put it in perspective, in the ancient Near East, a common laborer might earn maybe 10 pieces of silver in an entire year.
10 pieces a year, and
Wow.
he stole 1,100.
Yes, so 1,100 pieces, generational wealth.
Wow.
But there is also a really profound literary echo here. In the broader timeline of the book of Judges, the story of Samson occurs just prior to this. And do you remember what the exact price was that each Philistine lord promised to pay Delilah to betray Samson?
Wait, was it 1,100?
1,100 pieces of silver.
Oh, man, that is a phenomenal detail.
Yeah, the ancient audience hearing this number would immediately associate it with betrayal, spiritual compromise, and utter ruin.
It completely frames the entire interaction. So Micah steals this blood money fortune. His mother, obviously realizing she has been robbed blind, starts throwing out these vehement, terrifying curses.
And in the ancient world, a spoken curse carried immense psychological weight.
Right, it was believed to hold actual, tangible power.
Yes.
So Micah hears his mother raining down these curses, and the guilt and fear finally get the better of him, and he confesses. He comes to her and says, "The silver is with me. I took it."
He admits it.
He admits it.
Now,
if we pause here, in literally any functioning moral framework, ancient or modern, this is the moment for restorative justice.
right, the child steals, the child is caught.
The parent disciplines and restitution is made. The moral order is upheld. But that is not what happens here.
No, the moral order is entirely subverted. Instead of discipline, she bypasses accountability completely and goes straight into this bizarre performative blessing.
Yeah, she says, "Blessed be my son of the Lord."
Which makes no sense.
None. And then, to supposedly, honor God and cancel out her own curse, she takes 200 pieces of that stolen silver and hands it to a silversmith.
To forge a carved image and a molten idol.
Right. And she claims she is dedicating the stolen money to Yahweh. I mean, the text is dripping with irony here.
It really is. She is using embezzled funds to blatantly violate the second commandment.
The one that explicitly forbids graven images.
Exactly, while claiming she is doing it to honor the very God who authored that commandment.
It's the ultimate ethical loophole. And Micah leans right into this twisted logic. He takes this newly minted idol and sets up what the text calls a house of gods.
The shrine.
Yeah, a private, personalized shrine right in his own home. He crafts an ephod, which is a specialized garment meant only for the high priest.
Right.
And he gathers teraphim. Now, what exactly are teraphim in this context? Because it sounds like he's just collecting random religious artifacts.
Well, teraphim were household idols, but they represented a lot more than just spiritual comfort.
Okay.
In ancient Near Eastern culture, possessing the family teraphim was often legally associated with holding the rights to the family inheritance.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, they were symbols of ownership and authority. So Micah isn't just being superstitious here. He is consolidating power.
He's building an empire in his living room.
Exactly. He makes an ephod to mimic the legitimate priesthood. He gathers teraphim to assert his inheritance. And to top it all off, he consecrates his own son to serve as his personal priest.
So he's actively building a Frankenstein religion out of stolen parts.
That's a perfect way to describe it. He is taking the aesthetic trappings of the legitimate faith, the silver, the ephod, the title of priest, but stripping away all the actual moral demands.
The laws and the centralized authority are just gone.
Completely gone.
He wants the comfort of the divine without the authority of the divine. And, it really forces you to ask yourself about the mechanics of designer spirituality today.
Oh, absolutely.
Micah is treating religion the way a modern consumer treats a streaming service or like a customizable app.
Picking and choosing?
Yeah, picking the features he likes. But here is the thing about curating your own truth. If you are the one designing the God you worship, you are ultimately just worshiping a projection of your own ego.
Yes.
A God you create in your living room is never going to tell you that you are wrong.
Never. That is the precise psychological danger the author is highlighting here. And the narrative immediately introduces a catalyst that accelerates this corruption.
The Levite.
Yes. A young man comes wandering through the hill country. He is from Bethlehem in Judah, but he is a Levite.
And the Levites were not just any tribe, right? They had a highly specific function in this society.
Right. In the structure of the Israelite amphictyony, the Levites were the designated moral and spiritual anchors.
Okay.
They weren't given a centralized territory of their own like the other tribes. Instead, they were dispersed throughout all the other territories.
So they were everywhere.
Yeah. Their job was to teach the law, mediate disputes, and maintain the covenant loyalty that held the nation together. They were supposed to be the immune system of the society.
The immune system, I love that.
Yeah.
But this particular Levite, who we later learn is named Jonathan, he is completely unmoored.
He is.
The text describes him as simply traveling around looking for a place to live. He is a free agent, basically a mercenary, looking for the best gig.
And he stumbles onto Micah's property, and they have this conversation.
Yeah, Micah asks him where he's from, and when Micah discovers this wandering traveler is an actual credentialed Levite, he sees a massive opportunity.
A huge one.
Micah makes him an offer. He says, dwell with me and be to me a father and a priest, and I will give you 10 pieces of silver a year, a suit of clothing, and your food.
It is a stunningly transactional moment.
It really is. Micah is basically purchasing religious legitimacy.
He thinks, my homemade shrine was good, but having a real franchised Levite makes it official.
Yeah, it's like getting a blue check mark on his religion.
Exactly. And the tragedy is that the Levite accepts.
Right.
This young man, who was ordained to be the moral conscience of the people, should have walked into that house, seen the graven images funded by stolen silver, and immediately condemned it.
He should have flipped the tables.
He should have called Micah to repentance. Instead, he looks at the idols, he looks at the room and board, and he signs the contract.
He just signs it.
He completely abandons his sacred vocation to become a paid yes man.
And Micah's reaction to this is so telling. He says, now I know that the Lord will do good to me since I have a Levite as my priest.
He really believes he bought God.
He actually believes he has manipulated divine favor. He treats God like a vending machine. He put in the right token. He bought the right personnel. So now he is guaranteed a return on his investment.
Which perfectly illustrates the translation of this text into the modern day.
How so?
Well, we often look at ancient texts involving silver idols and teraphim, and we just dismiss them as, primitive superstitions.
Right, because we don't have little silver statues in our living rooms.
Exactly. But the underlying sociological mechanic is highly relevant. We still commodify truth. We seek out echo chambers.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Whether it's our curated social media feeds, our choice of political commentators, or even the spiritual leaders we choose to listen to, we frequently seek out modern Levites.
People with credentials.
People with authority who will simply rubber stamp the lives we have already decided we want to live.
That is so true. And if we surround ourselves exclusively with voices that affirm our existing biases, we lose the ability to perceive objective reality.
We become completely blind.
So, a practical reflection for you, the listener here. Take a hard look at the voices you allow to speak into your life. Do you intentionally seek out perspectives that challenge your blind spots?
It's a hard question.
It is. When was the last time a trusted source of wisdom in your life told you that you were fundamentally wrong and you actually listened? Right. If your guiding principles never demand sacrifice and never make you uncomfortable, they aren't guiding principles at all. They are just teraphim in your living room.
And the narrative brilliantly shows us that this individual corruption doesn't stay contained in Micah's house.
It scales up.
It scales up quickly. Once truth becomes a commodity that can be bought and sold, the infection spreads to the institutional level. Enter the tribe of Dan.
Right. We move into the events of chapter 18, and we find the tribe of Dan in a really vulnerable position. They haven't been able to fully secure their allotted territory down south.
They're being heavily pressured by the Philistines and the Amorites.
So, feeling squeezed, they decide to look elsewhere. They send out 5 military spies to scout for a softer target, some new land they can easily conquer.
And these guys travel north and happen to lodge near Micah's house in Ephraim.
What are the odds?
Right. While they are there, they recognize the voice or the dialect of the young Levite. They ask him, essentially, what are you doing here? Who brought you to this place?
And the Levite explains his mercenary arrangement. He admits he is a priest for hire.
And the spies don't see this as a red flag at all.
No, they see it as an asset. They asked him to consult God for them. They say, ask counsel of God, that we may know whether our way which we go shall be prosperous.
They want a divine seal of approval on their scouting mission.
Yeah. And the Levite, playing his role perfectly as the hired spiritual consultant, gives them the most generic fortune cookie blessing imaginable.
Right. Go in peace. Your way in which you go is before the Lord.
It is the ultimate manifestation of confirmation bias. The Levite doesn't seek truth. He reads the room.
He sees 5 heavily armed men and tells them exactly what they want to hear.
Exactly. So empowered by this hollow blessing, the spies continue north until they find a city called Losh.
And the description of Laish is crucial to understanding the horror of what happens next.
Yeah, the text says the people of Laish lived quiet and secure.
They were a peaceful agrarian community.
They had no magistrate, no standing army, and they were geographically isolated from the Zidonians, who might have been their allies.
They are the picture of vulnerability. So the spies return to their tribe and give their report.
And they don't say, hey, we found a peaceful people we can trade with.
No, they say, we found a completely defenseless people living in a very fertile land. God has handed them over to us. Let's go take it.
The moral decay has reached a point where the Danites view the vulnerability of others not as something to protect, but as an opportunity for exploitation.
Exactly. So 600 heavily armed Danite warriors march out to claim this land.
But on their way north to Laish, they make a pit stop.
Yes.
The 5 spies guide the army back to Micah's house. They tell the troops, hey, there's ephod, teraphim, and carved silver images in this shrine. You know what to do.
And they literally just walk into Micah's house and start looting his private religion.
It's crazy. And the Levite is standing at the gate watching these men walk out with his employer's gods.
He asks them, what are you doing?
And the Danites' response is the raw, unvarnished truth of a society operating without a moral center. They tell him, hold your peace, lay your hand upon your mouth and go with us.
A direct threat.
Yeah, they follow this threat with a corporate recruitment pitch. Is it better for you to be a priest to the house of one man, or that you be a priest to a tribe and a family in Israel?
They threaten him with violence and simultaneously offer him a promotion.
And the text reveals the Levite's character in one devastating sentence. It says, the priest's heart was glad.
Wow.
He doesn't experience a moment of moral conflict. He actually takes the stolen idols from the Danites, puts them in his own bags, and gets right into the middle of the armed ranks.
He sells out his patron the very second a more lucrative offer presents itself.
Literally the very second. Meanwhile, Micah realizes he's being robbed. He rallies his neighbors, and they chase down the Danite army.
And when Micah catches up to them, the armed warriors turn around and ask him, what ails you?
The audacity, they know exactly what they did. And Micah delivers this pathetic, almost heartbreaking line.
What does he say?
He says, you have taken away my gods which I made, and the priest, and you are gone away, and what have I more?
It is the ultimate tragic punchline of creating your own reality.
Yeah. If the god you worship can be stolen by a group of thugs, shoved in a sack, and carried off into the hills, it was never a god. It was just a piece of property.
And the Danites don't even offer a theological argument. They don't try to justify their actions legally. They rely purely on leverage.
Mate's right.
Exactly. They tell Micah, let not your voice be heard among us, lest angry fellows run upon you, and you lose your life with the lives of your household.
It is pure mafia extortion. They are saying, we have 600 swords, you have none. Go home, or we will kill your entire family.
And Micah looks at the numbers, realizes he is outgunned, and turns around, empty-handed. His designer religion failed him the moment it encountered real systemic power.
And the Danites just continue their march to Laish. They fall upon this quiet, unsuspecting city. They strike the peaceful inhabitants down with the edge of the sword. They burn the city to the ground. They rebuild it, and they rename it Dan.
And then the ultimate insult.
Yeah, they set up Micah's stolen silver idol. The text then reveals a shocking historical detail, actually.
Right, about the Levite.
Yeah. Jonathan, the mercenary Levite, is actually the grandson of Moses.
The descendant of the great lawgiver has become the chief priest of a stolen counterfeit religion in a city built on the blood of innocent people.
It's chilling. Which brings us to a terrifying sociological reality and really a bridge to the next sequence of events. There is a direct, undeniable causality here.
Absolutely.
When a culture decides that truth is subjective, that the divine is just a mascot to bless our own ambitions, and that religious authority is just a commodity to be bought to the highest bidder, it is only a matter of time before human beings are treated as commodities, too.
Exactly. If there is no objective moral law protecting the sacredness of truth, there is certainly no law protecting the sacredness of human life.
Right. The philosophical and spiritual rot we just witnessed in Micah's house is the necessary precondition for the horrific human devaluation we are about to see in the city of Gibeah.
And as an analytical guide to this material, I have to issue a profound warning here.
Yeah, please do.
The text we are about to explore in chapter 19 is one of the darkest, most disturbing narratives in the entire ancient corpus.
It really is.
It contains themes of extreme misogyny, callousness, sexual violence, and bodily mutilation. Modern readers frequently recoil and understandably ask why such a horrific account is preserved in a text considered sacred by billions.
It is a massive obstacle for growth. If you approach this text expecting to find moral role models or heroes to emulate, you will be deeply traumatized.
That is why we must practice careful discernment. We have to analyze why the author included this.
Yeah.
The writer of Judges is not prescribing this behavior. They're diagnosing a terminal societal illness. They are operating as a war correspondent, reporting from the very bottom of a civilizational collapse.
Okay, that makes sense.
This narrative is a mirror held up to show the logical terminus of every man doing what is right in his own eyes. Without a foundational ethic to protect the vulnerable, humanity rapidly descends into predatory brutality.
Okay, so let's trace the mechanics of how this nightmare unfolds. It begins with another Levite. He lives in the remote hill country of Ephraim, and he takes a concubine from Bethlehem in Judah.
Now, the term concubine or pelagesh in Hebrew needs some context.
Yeah, it's not what we think of today.
Right. It doesn't mean a casual mistress. In the ancient Near East, it was a recognized legal marital status. It was essentially a secondary wife, often indicating a difference in social class or dowry, but it definitely carried legal protections.
However, from the very start, the relational dynamics are fractured. The text says she became angry with him. Some translations say she played the whore. Others suggest a severe relational dispute. But either way, she flees back to her father's house in Bethlehem.
And she remains there for 4 months.
Eventually, the Levite travels south to, as the text says, speak friendly to her, to reconcile and bring her home. He arrives in Bethlehem, and his father-in-law is surprisingly overjoyed to see him.
And what follows is a strange, almost suffocating sequence of ancient hospitality.
Yeah, the father-in-law insists the Levite stay. For 3 days, they eat, drink, and feast. On the 4th day, the Levite tries to leave, but the father-in-law pressures him.
He says, "Comfort your heart with a morsel of bread, and afterward go your way."
They end up staying another night. On the 5th day, the Levite gets up early to leave, but again, the father-in-law delays him until the afternoon.
It is a toxic, boundary-pushing hospitality. It's the ancient equivalent of just one more drink, the night is still young. Because of this relentless pressure, the Levite, his concubine, and his servant don't hit the road until late in the afternoon on the 5th day.
Which is super dangerous.
Incredibly dangerous. By the time they travel a short distance north to the region of Gibeah, which is modern-day Jerusalem, but at that time was a stronghold controlled by the Jebusites, a non-Israelite Canaanite people, the sun is rapidly setting.
And the servant recognizes the danger. Traveling at night in the Levantine hill country was basically a death wish. Bandits, wild animals, total lack of visibility.
Right.
So the servant suggests they stop and lodge in Gibeah, but the Levite absolutely refuses. He says, "We will not turn aside hither into the city of a stranger that is not of the children of Israel. We will pass over to Gibeah."
And here we see a fatal assumption based on tribal epistemology.
Explain that.
The Levite assumes that because Gibeah belongs to the tribe of Benjamin, his own Israelite brethren, he will be safe.
He trusts his own tribe.
Yes. He assumes they are bound by the sacred, ancient Near Eastern laws of hospitality. In that culture, offering shelter to a traveler wasn't just a courtesy, it was a fundamental social contract meant to ensure mutual survival in a harsh environment.
Right. Refusing hospitality was practically tantamount to wishing death upon a stranger.
Exactly.
So they arrive in Gibeah just as the sun goes down. They sit down in the town square, waiting for someone to invite them in. But the hours pass, and the entire city ignores them.
The social contract is dead.
The bystander effect is in full force. Everyone assumes someone else will take them in, or worse, they actively choose to leave them exposed.
Finally, an old man coming in from working the fields sees them, and it is highly significant that this old man is not a Benjamite.
Right, he is an Ephraimite, merely sojourning in Gibeah.
It takes a foreigner to show basic human decency.
Yeah. So the old man warns them not to spend the night in the square. He takes them to his home, feeds their donkeys, and provides food and drink for the travelers. They believe they have narrowly escaped danger.
But the sanctuary is an illusion.
A complete illusion. While they are eating and resting, the text says the men of the city, referred to as the sons of Belial, which is a Hebrew idiom meaning worthless, lawless, or ungovernable men, they surround the house.
They beat on the door and shout to the old man, demanding he bring out the Levite so they can sexually assault him.
It's horrific.
And any ancient reader, and indeed any modern reader familiar with the text, will immediately recognize the deliberate literary parallel the author is drawing here.
Sodom and Gomorrah.
Yes. This scene is an almost point-for-point recreation of the story of Lot in Sodom from the book of Genesis.
Wow.
The author is making a profound, devastating theological point. Israel, the nation that was supposed to be a light to the world, the nation that was commanded to be distinct and holy, has become indistinguishable from Canaan.
Gibeah has literally become Sodom.
The moral collapse is absolute.
So the old man goes out to the mob and attempts to negotiate. But his proposed solution reveals that the moral rot has infected everyone, even the seemingly hospitable host.
Yeah.
He begs the mob not to commit this wicked folly against his male guest. Instead, he offers a horrifying compromise. He says, "Behold, here is my virgin daughter and his concubine. Them I will bring out now, and humble ye them, and do with them what seemeth good unto you. But unto this man do not so vile a thing."
It is a catastrophic failure of protection.
Yeah.
The host values the patriarchal rules of guest protection for the male Levite more than he values the bodily autonomy and life of his own daughter and the concubine.
It's sickening.
He attempts to uphold a distorted code of honor by sacrificing the most vulnerable people in his care to a predatory mob.
And the mob refuses the negotiation anyway. The tension reaches a breaking point. And this is where I want to focus on the character of the Levite.
This is key.
Because up until this exact second, you might view him as a flawed protagonist. He was trying to reconcile his marriage. He was just trying to get home safely. But in the ultimate crisis, when the door is about to break, his true character is revealed.
What does he do?
The text says, "The man took his concubine and brought her forth unto them." He doesn't fight. He doesn't offer himself. He physically forces her out the door into the hands of the mob and locks it behind her.
It is an act of supreme, chilling cowardice. And it is the psychological core of this chapter.
Absolutely.
The danger isn't just the lawless mob in the street. The danger is the moral bankruptcy of the institutions inside the house.
Yeah.
The Levite represents the religious and moral establishment of Israel. When the pressure of survival is applied, his morality instantly evaporates. He views the woman not as a human being worthy of protection, but as a shield.
A literal meat shield.
He commodifies her body to purchase his own safety.
And the text says the mob abused her all night. When the day begins to dawn, they finally let her go. She drives herself back to the house and collapses at the threshold, her hands resting on the doorframe.
And then the Levite's reaction in the morning is almost sociopathic in its detachment.
It's unbelievable. He opens the door, steps over her broken body, and says, "Up and let us be going."
He talks to her like she's just overslept.
Yes, but there is no answer. She is dead.
The callousness is breathtaking. He doesn't weep. He doesn't mourn. He loads her body onto his donkey, travels the rest of the way home to Ephraim, and then commits an act of calculated, grotesque political theater.
The dismemberment.
Yes. He takes a knife, dismembers her body into 12 pieces, and sends them via messengers throughout all the borders of the 12 tribes of Israel.
It is a gruesome, ancient form of a tribal summons. He is using her dismembered body as a prop to incite national outrage and demand vengeance.
And if we step back and translate this horror into our modern context, what are the underlying mechanisms we are looking at?
We're looking at the diffusion of responsibility and the lethal consequences of institutional failure.
Exactly.
The tragedy began with a city square full of people ignoring a traveler in need, the bystander effect. It escalated when the supposed moral leadership, the Levite, sacrificed a vulnerable dependent to save himself.
It is the horrific reality of treating humans as objects to be used, abused, and discarded by those in power.
The mob used her to gratify their violent lust. The Levite used her to protect his life. And even in death, the Levite uses her body as a political tool to rally an army.
Which forces you to ask yourself a highly uncomfortable, practical question.
Right. It is very easy to listen to this story and cast judgment on the mob of Gibeah or the cowardice of the Levite. But bring the psychological dynamic closer to home.
Look at your own sphere of influence.
Yeah, your workplace, your community, your institutions. Who are the vulnerable people relying on those systems? When the pressure is on, when institutional reputation or personal comfort is threatened, do we protect the vulnerable?
Or do we throw them out the door?
Exactly. When the metaphorical mob comes to the door, do we employ creative accounting, PR spin, or quiet sacrifices to protect our own status, throwing the vulnerable out the door to save the institution?
That is the exact mirror the text holds up to human nature. And the consequences of the Levite's action are immediate. His gruesome summons works perfectly.
The pieces of the body arrive in the territories of the 12 tribes, and the people are absolutely appalled. They declare, "No such deed has been done or seen since the day the children of Israel came up out of Egypt."
They are rightly outraged.
But as we transition into the next phase of the narrative, we see how dangerous collective outrage can be.
That's volatile.
A localized, horrific crime is about to mutate into a terrifying national phenomenon because outrage, even when it is initially justified by a genuine atrocity, can rapidly devolve into blind tribalism and unchecked destruction if it isn't tempered by self-reflection.
We move into chapter 20, and the scale of the narrative shifts from domestic horror to national mobilization. The Amphictyony is finally acting together, but for all the wrong reasons.
400,000 Israelite foot soldiers gather at a place called Mizpah.
It is an overwhelming show of force. They demand to know how this wickedness happened. And the Levite takes the stand to give his testimony before the assembly.
And his testimony is a masterclass in manipulation by omission.
Oh, totally.
He tells the assembly that the men of Gibeah surrounded the house to kill him and that they forced his concubine so that she is dead. What he conveniently leaves out is the fact that he was the one who actively threw her out the door.
He crafts a narrative that frames him purely as the victim, completely erasing his own complicity.
Yeah.
He knows that if he admits his cowardice, the assembly's righteous indignation might turn on him. By simplifying the story into a binary of pure good versus pure evil, he maximizes the outrage of the crowd.
And the crowd buys it completely. The congregation of Israel is unified, as the text says, as one man. They send messengers to the tribe of Benjamin with a demand that seems, on the surface, legally sound.
What's the demand?
They say, "Deliver us the men, the children of Belial, which are in Gibeah, that we may put them to death and put away evil from Israel."
Extradite the guilty party, let justice be served, and the rest of the tribe will be spared. Sounds reasonable.
But here we encounter the sociological mechanic of blind tribalism.
The tribe of Benjamin refuses the demand.
They refuse it.
They will not hand over the rapists and murderers. Instead, they choose tribal loyalty over objective justice. They circle the wagons.
They mobilize their own army. 26,000 men from the surrounding Benjamite cities, plus 700 elite chosen men from Gibeah itself.
They're willing to go to war against their own nation to protect the worst actors in their camp, simply because they are our guys.
It's insane, and the author gives us a fascinating detail about these elite troops from Gibeah. The text specifically notes that these 700 men were left-handed and that they could sling stones at a hairbreadth and not miss.
Yeah, that detail.
Why include that specific detail?
Well, it is a brilliant piece of literary irony. The name Benjamin in Hebrew literally translates to son of the right hand.
Oh.
Yet their most lethal, celebrated military force is defined by being left-handed.
That's fascinating.
The Deuteronomistic historian, the author compiling these accounts, is using a subtle linguistic cue to show how twisted and perverse the tribe has become. Benjamin is operated in direct contradiction to its own name and identity. They are backwards.
Wow. So the stage is set for a massive civil war. 400,000 Israelites against 26,700 Benjamites.
It's a bloodbath waiting to happen.
The Israelites go to Bethel to seek divine counsel. They ask God, which of us shall go up first to the battle? God replies, Judah shall go up first.
Okay.
The Israelite army marches on Gibeah, likely expecting an overwhelming, easy victory given their numerical superiority and their moral high ground.
But the result is shocking.
The Benjamites come out of the city and slaughter 22,000 Israelite soldiers on the first day.
22,000. It is a staggering tactical and psychological defeat.
The Israelites are stunned. They regroup, encourage each other, and go back to Bethel. They weep before God, and this time their question shifts slightly.
They ask, shall I go up again to battle against the children of Benjamin, my brother?
Notice they acknowledge the kinship now.
Right, and God says, go up against him. So on the second day, they launch another frontal assault.
And again, they are absolutely crushed. Benjamin destroys another 18,000 Israelite soldiers.
Unbelievable.
Over 2 days of fighting, an army that possessed a 14-to-1 numerical advantage and the seemingly righteous cause of justice loses 40,000 men.
This is a massive theological and narrative roadblock for many readers.
Yeah, why do they lose? They are seeking justice for an unspeakable crime. They asked God for permission, and they got it. Why did 40,000 men have to die?
It requires looking at the deeper structural issues of the nation. Commentators and historical theologians point out that this massive defeat serves as a severe divine rebuke for Israel's arrogant presumption and selective outrage.
Oh, right.
Think back to our first segment. The tribe of Dan blatantly stole idols, set up a counterfeit religion, and slaughtered a peaceful city. Did the rest of Israel mobilize 400,000 men to stop that spiritual treason?
No. They didn't do anything.
They ignored the idolatry creeping into their own backyards.
They only cared about the law when the violation was socially shocking and visceral.
Precisely. They approached this civil war trusting entirely in their superior numbers and their inflated sense of moral superiority. They believed that because Benjamin was entirely in the wrong, Israel must be entirely in the right.
But their hearts were just as compromised.
Exactly. They were fighting for justice, but they were doing it with an arrogance that needed to be broken.
That is a profound insight. It's a dynamic we see constantly in modern conflicts, whether in political debates, corporate power struggles, or deep interpersonal arguments.
We go in so arrogant.
We go into a conflict armed with the absolute certainty of our own moral superiority. We haven't done any self-reflection, we haven't audited our own compromises, and we expect an easy victory simply because we are on the right side of this specific issue.
And then we get demolished.
Exactly. It proves that it is entirely possible to fight for a just cause in a completely unjust, arrogant manner.
And it isn't until after the second devastating defeat that Israel finally realizes this.
The text says they return to Bethel, and this time the posture is entirely different.
They don't just weep, they fast until evening. They offer burnt offerings and peace offerings. They humble themselves.
And the question they ask God changes fundamentally. They ask, "Shall I yet again go out to battle against the children of Benjamin, my brother, or shall I cease?"
They finally introduce the possibility of yielding. They are no longer demanding victory. They are asking if they should even be fighting.
And it is only in that posture of humility and dependence that God promises them success. He says, "Go up, for tomorrow I will deliver them into thine hand."
So on the third day, they change their tactics. They abandon the arrogant frontal assault and employ strategy.
They set an ambush.
Right, very similar to the tactic Joshua used centuries earlier at the city of Ai. The main Israelite force approaches the city and then feigns a retreat, drawing the Benjamite defenders out into the open highways.
And the Benjamites, flushed with their previous victories, think, "We are beating them again."
But they leave the city undefended. The 10,000 Israelites waiting in ambush rush into Gibeah, put the inhabitants to the sword, and set the city on fire.
And the psychological turning point of the battle occurs when the Benjamite soldiers, out in the field pursuing the retreat, look back over their shoulders.
They see a massive pillar of smoke rising from Gibeah.
The text says, "They were amazed, for they saw that evil was come upon them."
The panic sets in. They turn and flee toward the wilderness, but the trap is sprung. The main Israelite army turns back, and the ambush force comes out of the city, surrounding the Benjamites.
It becomes a total slaughter. 25,100 Benjamite soldiers are killed. Only a remnant of 600 men managed to break through the lines, escape into the wilderness, and take refuge at a defensible position called the Rock of Rimmon.
But the tragedy doesn't end with the defeat of the army.
No.
The righteous indignation of the Israelites mutates into an uncontrolled, scorched earth bloodlust.
The text says the men of Israel turned back upon the children of Benjamin and smote them with the edge of the sword, as well the men of every city as the beast and all that came to hand. Also they set on fire all the cities that they came to.
They systematically wipe out the civilian population of their own brother tribe.
And this brings us to a crucial modern translation. The mechanics of group polarization are on full display here. We see the horrific danger of what happens when outgroup homogenization takes over.
They stopped seeing the Benjamites as individuals.
Yes. They stopped differentiating between the guilty men of Gibeah and the innocent women and children of the surrounding towns. They categorized an entire population as the enemy and annihilated them.
It is the ultimate warning against unchecked tribalism. We see this dynamic in modern political and social polarization all the time.
When loyalty to your tribe overrides your moral compass, two things happen.
First, like Benjamin, you end up defending the indefensible in your own camp just to avoid conceding a point to the opposition.
And second, like Israel, your demand for justice against the other side can rapidly escalate into a desire for their total destruction. You become so consumed with punishing the monsters that you become a monster yourself. So, a moment of reflection for you listening. Evaluate the tribal lines you draw in your own life, whether political, ideological, or social. Are you excusing toxic behavior in your own camp while demanding severe punishment for that exact same behavior in the opposing camp?
That's a vital question to ask.
When you engage in conflict, is your goal restorative justice, or is your goal the complete humiliation and destruction of the person on the other side? Because if it is the latter, you might win the argument, but the collateral damage will be catastrophic.
Which leads perfectly into the final agonizing chapter of this text. The adrenaline of the war fades, the smoke clears, and the Israelites are forced to look at what they have actually done.
The nation gathers again at Bethel, but this time there is no righteous anger. There is only profound grief.
They lift up their voices and weep bitterly, crying out, "O Lord God of Israel, why has this come to pass in Israel that there should be today one tribe lacking in Israel?"
They realize that in their zeal, they have virtually driven one of the 12 tribes to extinction.
Only 600 men remain at the rock of Rimmon. If those men die without heirs, the tribe of Benjamin is erased from history.
They are desperate to fix the disaster they created, but they find themselves trapped in a psychological and legal cage of their own making.
During the height of their outrage at Mizpah, before the war even started, the entire assembly had sworn a rash, impulsive oath to God.
Yeah, they said, "There shall not any of us give his daughter unto Benjamin to wife."
In the ancient world, an oath sworn before God was considered inviolable. Breaking it would invite divine wrath, so they are caught in a massive cognitive dissonance.
They need to provide wives for these 600 survivors to save the tribe, but they are legally bound not to give them their own daughters.
And this is where we see the phenomenon of escalation of commitment, or the sunk cost fallacy, play out on a horrific scale.
Explain that.
Instead of humbling themselves, admitting they made a foolish, bloodthirsty vow in the heat of anger, and asking God for absolution from that vow, they decide to honor the letter of the law while completely obliterating the spirit of the law.
They look for a loophole. They rely on technicalities. It reminds me of the darkest forms of corporate crisis PR or creative accounting. When an institution makes a catastrophic error, rather than admitting fault and paying the penalty, the lawyers and executives construct bizarre, convoluted technicalities to shield the company from the intent of the law.
Even if it causes massive collateral damage to the public.
Exactly. That is exactly what the elders of Israel do. They need a loophole. They realize that their oath only applied to those who were present at the assembly in Mizpah.
So they check the muster rolls to see if any city failed to send representatives to the war. They discover that no one from the city of Gibeah showed up.
Now, previously, they had made another rash, violent oath stating that anyone who didn't join the assembly for the war would be put to death.
So they use one terrible vow to solve the problem created by another terrible vow.
It's madness.
Yeah.
They dispatch 12,000 of their most valiant warriors to Gibeah with a chilling directive.
They command the army to smite the inhabitants of Gibeah with the edge of the sword, including the women and children, but to spare the young virgins.
It is a staggering repetition of violence. They slaughter an entire Israelite city, their own brethren, just to extract 400 young women as spoils of war.
They bring these 400 traumatized women back to the camp and give them to the surviving Benjamites as wives.
It is a dark, sickening, cyclical irony. I mean, let's trace the logic. The entire national civil war was sparked because a woman was violently abused and killed by the men of Benjamin.
Right.
And the nation's solution to the fallout of that war is to violently slaughter a city, kidnap 400 innocent women, and force them into marriage with the exact same men they were just fighting.
They justify an atrocity to cover up a mistake. But the horrifying math doesn't even work out.
No.
They only secured 400 women, and there are 600 Benjamite men. They are still short 200 wives, and they still refuse to break their vow.
So the elders, the supposed wisdom of the nation, concoct a second, even more convoluted loophole.
They remember that there is an annual religious festival in Shiloh dedicated to Yahweh. During this festival, it was customary for the young women of the city to come out and dance in the vineyards.
The elders instruct the remaining 200 Benjamite men to go to Shiloh and hide in the vineyards. They give them explicit orders. When the daughters of Shiloh come out to dance, come out of the vineyards and catch you, every man his wife, and go to the land of Benjamin.
It is a state-sanctioned, premeditated mass kidnapping.
And the elders even promise to handle the legal fallout. They tell the Benjamites, when their fathers or brothers come to complain to us, we will say, be favorable to them for our sakes, because you didn't actually give your daughters to them, so you aren't guilty of breaking the oath.
It is the absolute nadir of moral reasoning. The leaders of Israel are telling the fathers of Shiloh, look, you didn't willingly give your daughters to these men, they were stolen. Therefore, technically, you didn't break the vow, so just let it go.
They use legalistic gymnastics to excuse kidnapping.
They prioritize the technical maintenance of a foolish vow over the safety, autonomy, and basic human rights of their own children.
They have entirely lost the plot. When human reasoning is divorced from a higher moral law, when we rely entirely on our own cleverness to solve the problems we created through our own arrogance, we inevitably end up justifying the unjustifiable.
The author is showing us that a society without a king, without a central truth, doesn't just devolve into random violence. It devolves into institutionalized, legalized violence.
The leaders use the machinery of the law to perpetuate evil while keeping their own hands technically clean.
How often do we see this dynamic at play in our own lives? Albeit on a smaller scale. We hold on to a bitter grudge in a family, or we enforce a flawed, draconian policy in a workplace, or we maintain a prideful stance in a relationship.
We see that our rigidity is causing massive collateral damage to the people around us.
But instead of admitting we were wrong and dropping the vow, we say, well, it's the principle of the thing, or I gave my word, I have to see it through.
The practical reflection here is to evaluate the vows in your life. What are the rigid rules, the unyielding assumptions, or the deep-seated grudges you refuse to let go of? Are those rules actually serving justice, promoting healing, and fostering human flourishing?
Or are they just defense mechanisms protecting your ego while actively hurting the people you claim to care about?
Sometimes the most moral action you can take is to admit your previous stance was wrong, break your own foolish rule, and embrace grace.
That requires a level of humility that the Israelites in this narrative simply did not possess. Which brings us to the synthesis of this entire harrowing journey.
We started in a living room in Ephraim, with a man stealing silver to build a custom idol.
We ended with the national leadership orchestrating mass kidnappings to cover up the near extinction of a tribe they just slaughtered.
And every single step of that descent, every localized tragedy and national catastrophe traces back to the central thesis the author leaves us with.
The final verse of the book of Judges repeats the refrain one last time. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Every man did that which was right in his own eyes.
It sounds like the ultimate definition of freedom. I am the captain of my soul. I am the sole arbiter of my reality. But the historical and psychological evidence provided by this text proves that this philosophy is a fast track to chaos.
It leads first to the commodification of truth, where God and religion become customizable tools for our ambition.
That inevitably leads to the commodification of others, where vulnerable people are sacrificed to protect our comfort and status.
That sparks selective outrage and blind tribal warfare.
And it ultimately ends in a state of deep moral blindness, where we cannot even perceive the evil we are committing in the name of fixing our own mistakes.
Without a transcendent truth to anchor a society, power becomes the only viable metric. Might makes right. The Danites take Micah's idols because they have more swords.
The mob in Gibeah abuses the concubine because they have the numbers.
The Israelites annihilate Benjamin because they have the larger army. True freedom isn't found in the absence of all authority. It is found in the presence of a just moral foundation that restrains the powerful and protects the vulnerable.
It is a heavy, challenging conclusion, but it's profoundly necessary for understanding the mechanics of human nature and society. Which leaves us with a final, provocative thought for you to carry into your week.
Something to mull over.
As you navigate your relationships, your career, and the inevitable conflicts of life, ask yourself, what is the king or the ultimate guiding principle in your life?
If you are the sole arbiter of your own morality, if your only compass is what feels right in your own eyes at any given moment, are you truly prepared for the logical destination of that path?
Is true freedom doing whatever you want? Or is it found in submitting to a truth higher than yourself?
That's the real question.
That's the heart of this section. This is Wisdom for the Present, where understanding leads to clarity, and clarity shapes how we see and live. We'll see you in the next episode.